Well, welcome again, everyone, all our friends. I'm glad to be with you. And Taylor and I will be doing tonight. And, as we talked about what to do, we wanted to do a couple things tonight. Number one, weave in and kind of, weave in all the prior sessions into a whole picture about what we're up to. And we're excited about what we got going, and we're hoping, because Taylor and I were talking, it's like, people, and I heard it especially last week, it was a very good segment last week, but I remember hearing how people are just at home and they feel stuck and unmotivated and everything like that. It's like, yeah, what do we do at times like this? Do we just endure it? Do we just survive it? Or can we actually flip it and to make it powerful for us? And so Taylor and I came up with this topic of having meaningful conversations during this time, conversations that lead to a future worth having. And so I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to her. She's going to start us off tonight, and then we will go from there.
Hello, everyone. It's so fun to see. I've got some family on the call and some dear friends. It's so sweet. So yeah, as Enya was kind of saying, we have been talking about some different topics each week. And if you haven't been on the call, you're not going to miss anything by not having been on the previous ones for today. But I do recommend them because they've been great so far, in my opinion. But so the first week, we're living under this premise of flourishing in times of uncertainty. And so the first week we talked through living in acceptance and surrender of what is without judgment or resistance. So what it actually means to practice acceptance and surrender. And then we shifted to our internal conversations and how those are contributing to how things are occurring to us in real time. Kristen and Chris walked us through this mindfulness exercise where we got to practice breath work and breathing. So when we begin to react or we're in resistance rather than acceptance and surrender, like a real practice for us to actually move into acceptance and surrender and get grounded. And then last week, Jane and Brandon kind of talked through grief and lamenting and expressing and practicing gratitude in our life for the things that we do have to be grateful for. So, part of what I'm going to do tonight is going to be a little back and forth, a little more casual. So it's occurred to me, like, how do these all fit together? What's the point of doing all of this? So I'm going to throw out some questions over the course of my little segment here. And if you have a thought, just quickly jump off mute, say what's occurring to you of what you think the point of all these separate exercises are. If anybody has any thoughts on that, go ahead and jump in real quick.
Could you repeat what you just asked for?
Yeah, of course. So what I'm essentially asking is, what do you think the point of all of these practices are? What do you think the goal is for us to start working on some of these things in our life?
Growth.
Yeah, growth is a great one.
I would say to have more peace.
Oh, I love that. Peace is a great answer. Yeah, and you know what? I think some of those are a little interconnected as well. When we grow, we might experience more peace because we're living in more acceptance. I want to share this with you. This is the definition that we use at reInvent for flourishing. Can everybody see that? Great. So it says, the webbing together of God, humans, and all creation in justice, fulfillment, and delight in what the Old Testament prophets called shalom.
Oh, yeah.
We call it peace, but it means far more than mere peace of mind or a ceasefire among enemies. Shalom means universal flourishing, wholeness, and delight, a rich state of affairs that inspires joyful wonder, in which natural needs are satisfied, natural gifts fruitfully employed. Shalom, in other words, is the way things ought to be, the full flourishing of human life in all aspects, as God intended it to be. And so when I talk about what the purpose of all of this is, ultimately, we're aiming to produce what we want most in life: meaningful conversations and intimacy with people. So when we started talking about meaningful conversations, I thought of this video that started circulating about 6 years ago. It's called "It's Not About the Nail." And if you've seen it, you know what I'm talking about. And if you haven't, I would suggest that you go watch it. It's only about 2 minutes, but it's absolutely hilarious. And the basic premise of the video is the wife and husband are having a conversation, and she's expressing this pain she has on her forehead and how she just feels like it's getting in the way of everything in her life, and it's so frustrating, and she has all this pressure. And every time the husband goes to respond, he's like, "Babe, I think if you just took the nail out of your forehead, you'd probably feel better." And she's like, "It's not about the nail. I don't need a solution. I don't need a quick fix. I just want you to listen to what I'm trying to say to you." And he's like, "Yeah, but I'm just trying to explain. If you took the nail out of your forehead, you might feel better." And it's absolutely hilarious because she's got a nail sticking straight out of her forehead. And ultimately the conversation resolves because he finally just kind of leans over and touches her, and he says, "Wow, babe, that must be really hard." And she's like, "It is. Thank you for saying that." So I think it kind of, in a lighthearted way, depicts this dynamic we get into with people when we're trying to have a meaningful conversation. There's a lot that can go wrong that gets in the way of us really having one. So that aside, as probably not a very meaningful conversation, or one that is meant to just kind of be lighthearted, I want you to consider what occurs to you when you hear the phrase "a meaningful conversation." So I think the best way to bring that to mind would be to consider a meaningful conversation you've ever had with someone. Or perhaps if you can't call to mind a meaningful conversation, maybe you can think of somebody that you have a lot of intimacy with, that you're wanting to or striving to continue to practice that intimacy with. So if you will, just close your eyes really quickly, and I want you to bring to mind that person. Maybe you're actually remembering a specific conversation where that felt really meaningful. I want you to imagine that person sitting in front of you. If you can, maybe remember where you were, what season of your life you were in. Imagine how that feels. And just notice, what does it feel like to be in this meaningful conversation? What are your thoughts? How does your heart feel? How does your body feel? Just notice what that feels like. Notice what's occurring in the conversation. Is there a lot of talking? Is there not a lot of talking? What's the body posture of the other person in front of you? Are they making eye contact? Are they having physical touch? What's the other person saying? What are they doing? Or maybe you remember how they were with you, just their presence, their way of being. And just notice, what are the things about how they're being and doing and saying that stand out to you as meaningful? And then I want you to consider how you're being in the conversation. How do you feel? What are you sharing? What's your body posture like? What are you saying? What are you doing? Do you recall what the presence was, how you were being with the person? And just notice what's occurring to you as you're imagining this meaningful conversation. All right, thank you. You guys can open your eyes now. So what I'd love to hear from is just a few people to just share what they noticed about that whole process, anything that occurred to you.
Self-affirmation.
As I had my eyes closed, I was thinking about interaction with my wife over something, and I just remember being in turmoil and very emotional, but with her presence and just the some of the questions she asked, it calmed me down. It was just her presence. It was what she wasn't saying. She was saying very little, but I felt so connected to her in the responses she was giving or the questions that she was asking.
That's awesome. So that had such an impact on you that you actually can recall that whole conversation right now.
Yes, I'm sitting in the room where that happened.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I thought it was really interesting that you shared it was what she wasn't saying. So it was just her silence and listening and being with you and her presence that really created the meaningful conversation for you.
Right.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that, Gary.
This is Alexandra. I was thinking of like walking with a friend, and it was sunshiny, and my friend was right next to me, and like everything was good. We were going from the pool, just like having not a care in the world, like, oh, maybe we should go for ice cream. You know, like there was like deep conversation, but it also was just like everything's good.
So it was just really connecting for you guys, kind of lighthearted, just being fully present with one another, getting fresh air.
Yep.
Honestly, that sounds so great right now.
Right? It was like right by like one of those like water, like the spraying fountains from the center of the pond. There's like ponds, and then there's like spraying fountains. It's like a super, super awesome pool.
That's awesome. Great. Thank you for sharing that. Maybe one more person? Just anything you noticed.
I'll go. This is Kim from, I'm in Massachusetts at the moment. I was thinking about a conversation that I had with a friend who's actually on this call, and it started out where we were missing each other. We weren't on the same wavelength. And then as a result of just like being honest and open and vulnerable with where I was at in the conversation, there was a total dynamic shift, and there was the ability to be really present with one another. Mm-hmm. And it was during this quarantine, so we couldn't actually like touch or hug or be close to each other at all. And yet it was still this really intimate experience, I think mostly because there was, it was rooted in honesty and authenticity and vulnerability.
So thank you for sharing that. One of the things I heard you say was that you were missing each other, and then something shifted in the conversation, which I heard you describe as honesty, openness, and vulnerability, that changed the conversation from being one where you were missing one another to one where you were having meaningful conversations.
Yeah, and I would say it's sticking out in my mind as one of the most like significant conversations that I've had probably in the last few months. So, and I have a lot of deep conversations, so that's
awesome.
Something.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. That's awesome. So, I want to take this phrase that I read in The Wounded Healer, which is an awesome book by Henry Nouwen. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. It's a great book on like a really Christian perspective on leadership. But he uses this phrase, getting comfortable in your own house. And this phrase really like landed for me as a really like clear picture of what it means for me to be in relationship with people. And it really begins with us. So it begins with you. A meaningful conversation always begins with you and how you're participating in the conversation. And it brings up this really clear picture. So getting comfortable in your own house means we get familiar with ourselves in such a way that we invite someone else in. So I want you to imagine what it's like for you to be at home. And I know that's going to be really easy for everyone to do right now because we're all at home all the time. So you have a lot of familiarity with what I'm asking of you. But just imagine what it's been like for you to be at home. I have seen countless jokes about people being in their sweatpants and doing only laundry. That's just like lounge pants, lounge clothes, everything. You're comfortable. You have your feet kicked up. You know where everything is. It's your house. unless you're my husband, in which you cannot find a single thing, even if it's sitting right in front of you in the fridge or the pantry, and people are constantly asking you where the milk is when it's standing right there. But when you're in your own house, you're typically inviting somebody in. You're showing hospitality to someone who comes over. When they come into your house, you let them know where the bathroom is. You might offer them a drink or some food. And you kind of set the tone of how the culture is of your home. So whether that means, you get really cozy and you invite everyone to be really cozy with you, or, maybe you're a more formal type of family, and so it just feels a little more rigid in your household. But in that sense, you're comfortable in your own house because it's your house. You know where everything is. So in a similar sense, we become comfortable with ourselves so that we can invite people in to knowing us by serving them and sharing with us what's occurring to us. So just like we're aware of where everything is in our house for the most part, and we know what occurs and what goes on in our home, it's our responsibility to also know what's going on in ourselves. So when we're comfortable with ourselves, we invite people into knowing us. And we do this by serving them, by sharing our wounds and our pains. And when we share our wounds and our pains, it's not as a form of complaint. It's not as a form of sharing your good victim story. But it's a form of opening. Wounds and pains become openings and occasions for new vision. So when we're willing to get to know ourselves and then invite people to be with us, this mutual confession of sharing what our hurts and our longings and our desires are, it becomes an opportunity for them to share with you. And it becomes this mutual deepening of hope, where we see each other in our human condition, sharing weakness, and it becomes a reminder for us that we're all in progress and that we're all looking towards heaven. But the key factor of this is that only you, who are able to articulate your own experience, can offer yourself to others as a source of clarification. So this kind of hospitality, if you will, of inviting people in and being willing to serve them means that you know where you stand, but it also requires that you open the door. It requires that you allow others to enter into your life, come close to them, and ask them how their lives connect with yours. And sometimes we live in this false supposition that there should be no fear, there should be no loneliness, there should be no confusion or doubt. But the reality is these sufferings can only be dealt with creatively when we understand them as wounds that are integral to our human condition, one that everybody shares. And so in a similar way, most homes have tables and chairs and beds. So does the human condition have wounds and pains and longings and desires. There's something that join us together and connect us. But the reality of that is being comfortable in your own house and showing hospitality by inviting someone in, it can be a really confronting practice. It doesn't allow us to live with this illusion that we don't have brokenness. We actually have to look it in the face. And not only that, when we invite others in, we have to look their pain in the face. We have to confront it with them as well. But this is where liberation begins in our intimacy. This is where connection begins. And as we start bringing these things up to the surface in our hearts, and as we bring things up to the surface in our relationships, that's actually how God can begin to start doing this deeper work in our life. So creating these meaningful conversations means that we must be a person who's willing to put our own articulated heart at the availability of others that we want to create these meaningful conversations with. You know, Jesus being one of the best examples I could possibly come up with of somebody who created meaningful conversations. He was revolutionary, and the reason he was revolutionary is not because he offered people an ideology, but Jesus was revolutionary because he offered people himself. And this picture that came to mind was Jesus washing the feet of his disciples. He was the servant of servants who was willing to totally risk cultural repercussions and just fully expose himself in front of the people he cared about most so that they could see him and understand him. So in this sense, we also get to be the servant of servants. We are the first to enter the promised land, the dangerous promised land. We are the first to tell those who are afraid what we have seen, heard, and touched. And if we put on this attitude that meaningful conversations occur because we are willing to go first, we're probably going to see them occurring more often in our life. When we're willing to go first in sharing our hurts and our pains, and we're the invitation and opening for others to connect and share with us, we can actually modify these relationships. And we do it through our presence, through our way of being. It's not an act of forcefulness or demands or shoulds or ought tos, but it's an invitation at who we are that allows us to connect with people. And so when I adopt this way of being that communicates my human condition, my fears, my desires and longings, I invite the person that I'm with to be with me in this way. And this ends up involving a lot of risk and exposure, but it also allows us to see others and to hear their longings and desires as well. And it occurred last week. I was in a conversation with someone that's very close to me, and I left the conversation feeling like that was not meaningful. I was not true. I don't feel heard. I don't feel seen. And I started really asking myself the question, what did I bring to this conversation? And what I really realized was that I didn't open the door to my house. I wasn't comfortable with what was occurring to me in a way that invited the other person of being with me. Now, part of the conversation was, well, you know, this person wasn't really giving me an opening to show up the way that I would, or I didn't feel like safe, or it didn't seem trustworthy or appropriate. But the reality is, when I'm willing to go first, I'm willing to take the risk and expose myself and be seen. And so looking back on that conversation, I can see how there were things that were getting in the way for me of fully being willing to go in and jump into that conversation wholeheartedly. And so the truth is, I get to go again, and I get to be a little more comfortable in my house after having that experience. And I get to really consider what was getting in my way. And so I'm going to shift it back over to Ennio, and he's going to walk us through some practices of noticing what's going to keep us from having these meaningful conversations.
Thank you, Taylor. That was all very well put. And I love the metaphor of welcoming people into our quote unquote house, meaning, you know, just our life experience. And I think, you know, if I ask for a show of hands, I can only see one screen at a time, but we all, I think, long to have meaningful conversations and connections that create a future or a hope that's, you know, future worth having. So the question is, and what we're going to lay out here as we move forward is what gets in the way of that? You know, why don't we have it as often as we could? So first off, I think what we need in these instances is to have a compelling vision that'll pull you through your resistance. So those of you that have been through the training know we have a sign up that says, you know, have a vision that'll call you through the pain of transformation. And you could put any kind of words to it, but it's really about the resistance, right? And the things that we resist. And we don't, listen, when we go to change things, it's going to upset the apple cart. It just is. And you're not only have resistance in yourself, but you have resistance from the other person as well, even if what you're after is something good. So I think that's something to really be aware of, that if you create a vision like Taylor just had us do, you know, remembering what it was like to have that connection, remembering what it was like I can't believe it. I mean, mine was over 40 years ago when I was dating Donna. I remember we went to Big Bear. We were driving home, and I was driving, and she turned around. She was in the front seat. She turned around so she couldn't see out the windshield, and just looked at me and talked to me. And I was driving, of course, so I had to pay attention to that. But I'll never forget that feeling. It was just so connected. It was just, makes me want to cry. I remember that so well. And we've had other times like that, of course, but that's what came to mind. And I was surprised because that was so long ago. So if it isn't a compelling enough vision, we're not going to go through what it takes. And to have meaningful conversations like Kim so graciously shared, it means really, opening yourself up. And so, Taylor, I want you to go ahead and put up that sheet about why we resist or avoid having these conversations. Put up that one part that I drew up. And think about these, see if these are true for you. You think about something you want to address, and a thought comes through, it can make matters worse. Or I could be rejected. I could be misinterpreted, right? And I want to be seen as nice and stuff like that. It might force an outcome from which I'm not prepared. That's an interesting thought. It's like, wow, so I choose the familiar and the comfortable. I could incur retaliation. I might hurt their feelings. Of course, in our trainings, we always think that's a pretty arrogant statement because it's like, I'm too much for them. They can't really handle it. Really, it's we don't want to handle what might happen. How about this? That I could discover that I'm the problem. And I may have to face disappointment again. So consequently, of course, we don't share those things for those reasons with others. And so then everything remains the same. The problem continues and spreads. And I think this next one is, we don't really get this, but I lose respect for myself and for them. They can't handle it, but then, like, I forget who was sharing, is like, where was I? And I think that was you, Taylor, but where was I in that conversation, right? And so then I just have more internal conversations that do nothing, and then the tension grows. So now, thank you. You could close that screen out. So chances are many of you are experiencing some level of breakdowns in your relationship as this shutdown continues for many reasons. In my own house, we're not having so much of those right now. And I think it's because, I've been in a physical condition with having my my shoulder replaced. But Dawn's really been taking care of me and being very gentle about everything, because usually she's the braver one to open up these kind of conversations. The level of breakdown at any given time really could be just ridiculous to be like really incredibly painful. So I want to break this segment up by showing you this little under 2-minute video. So Taylor, could you show us this video that we found here? Some of you may have seen this.
At first it was okay. It was like a really nice long weekend. And then madness. It's too much togetherness. This entire experience has made me very much aware that I want a man in my life, just not in my house. Hook up my DVD player and my printer, maybe help me flip the mattress now and then get out. Yesterday, the man asked me where we keep the spoons. The spoons. For God's sake, we've been married 31 years. The spoons are kept where they always are kept, in the silverware drawer. He recently found all of the old cassettes of music that he used to listen to when he was in high school, and thought it would be fun if we just listened to those songs yesterday. There's only so much of the band America a person can listen to. I mean, that stupid song, riding through the desert on a horse with no name. It's not deep, it's stupid. I mean, name your horse, for crying out loud. Prickly Pete's a good name. Snoopy. Just name it and be done with it. hiding in here because I don't think he can find me in here. The man can't find the spoons. Chances are he's not going to look in the closet for his wife. And if he does, I'm going to have to watch all 5 of the Planet of the Apes movies. He thought that would be a good time for us this evening. Oh, the horror.
Thank you. Close that up. So I just thought that was hilarious because you remember a few weeks ago, we did the whole thing about the conversations that we're always having within ourselves, right? I'm always in a conversation with myself, and sometimes it involves other people. And so, what struck me about that, of course, that's silly, and she's talking about her husband, but think of how true that is with whoever is significant in your life. If you have children, there's conversations you avoid, but you have all these internal conversations, or an extended family member that for some reason just really grates you wrong. And so you have all these internal conversations, and really it doesn't shift anything. But that's the key. We know, we have evidence that it probably won't shift. And so when Don and I do the marriage workshop, one of the things that we present is what John Gottman, who's, I think, one of the most premier marriage experts on this planet right now. He says that, this is astounding to me, 69% of the breakdowns in a relationship, like a marriage relationship he's talking about, are not resolvable. 69%. And he didn't just make that number up. He's done thousands of interviews and scientific testing on these kind of things. I don't know if it's scientific, but he has the stats. And what's really powerful about that is it doesn't need to sink the relationship just because they're not resolvable. There's ways to be with each other. And that's part of, I think, going back to Chris's talk the first week about how just accepting things and surrendering that maybe this is how it is. I'll never forget, I was having a meaningful conversation with a good friend of mine. And she and her husband were both present in this conversation. And she was, in essence, complaining about how after 30 years, he hasn't shifted. And knowing these stats that I just asked her a simple question. I said, so then what'll happen? So imagine it never changes, or that it can't change. Then what? And that question really, really struck her, because she shifted in that moment in sense to accepting, and started looking at all the wonderful things she loves about him, not what's missing, right? And that in turn opened it up for them to have more meaningful conversations and taking the pressure off. And he's showing up in a much different way, but that's not her being insistent that he do it. It's just by her opening herself up. And so I thought that was really powerful. So, and here's the thing about the funny little video we showed. It's we don't really think about how people actually, quote unquote, hear those internal conversations that we're having. Here's what I mean by that. So in the trainings we talk about, we all know this. There's an estimated, 10 to 13% of communication is verbal. And all the rest is tone, facial expression, body posture, mood. People can pick up on your mood. Those are all internal conversations coming out, and people hear they're very loud. Even if you don't say something, wrong, they get it. And Don's made me aware of that a lot of times. I'm not aware of my tone and everything like that. And so people hear those things. Our communication is much more than words. It's interesting, the actual word conversation, it's, a verse is a way of speaking. Con means with. And too often we don't have, these conversations with another person. We have them with ourselves, but it bleeds out. And so as humans, we can get stuck in these things. When life or a person is not shown up the way that we prefer them to, or we think the way we should, we can get stuck on that and just constantly have an eye on that, and whenever time it comes up, it draws a reaction in us and everything like that. So, so we get a quote that a phrase that we use is "get on it" about it, and we get stuck. Now, this is an exercise that we use in different types of workshops and stuff like that. We don't really use it in a training, but when we get on it and get stuck with people, we have plenty of evidence. There's so much evidence. We didn't just make it up, right? And so sometimes an effective way to get unstuck is just to get off it, just to let it go. And we can get off of what you think needs to be changed. You can get off of what, the wrong that the person did with you. I'm not saying you shouldn't talk through forgiveness and stuff like that. But sometimes, even when that has happened, we still are stuck. And so I'm going to have Taylor, put on this other sheet of what getting off of it means. I'm going to read these one at a time. And as I read them, I'd like you to just see which one resonates for you, all right? Getting off of my successes as well as my breakdowns. Now, I'll expand on a couple of them, but think about when you're really accomplishing a lot and stuff like that. We could classify that as a success, and we can get stuck on that and compare. Right? It's like, man, you're not doing anything, and I'm doing all this stuff, right? Or getting off my agenda, getting off my history and into my future, getting off my worldview or perspective, God forbid, especially politically these days, getting off my comparisons, getting off my complaints, getting off of my stories, getting off of my need to be right or defend or control, getting off of my expectations. Now, I would add the word illegitimate expectations to this, because of course, as humans, we're going to have expectations, but we can get stuck. Getting off of using people, getting off giving up on people, getting off of my assumptions, getting off my offenses and hurts, getting off of my guilt. This was another conversation just happened last week with a good friend. She expressed she feels guilty because her life is going so well right now. I mean, yes, she's quarantined like everybody else, but it's going well. Finances aren't a big issue, and she feels guilty about that, comparing herself to all these other people that are struggling. And it's like, well, why do I get to have this good thing and all these other people are suffering? Getting off of people hearing me, getting off of people get me, getting off of having people like me. These are all things that we can get stuck on. So I'd like to do something right here, right now. And I'd like you to survey your life with these topics in mind. And I'd like to ask you, where might you be stuck? What do you need to get off of? What jumps out at you? Or what do you intuit is something that is getting in the way of having these meaningful conversations? Like for instance, like getting off giving up on people. That could be someone that you care about so much, and they've never shifted, and you're just like, well, okay, whatever. And that's different than surrendering in the way that we were talking about it. That's just full on, just throwing in the towel on it and not caring anymore. It's more apathetic. So if you guys would just take a minute, I'm going to actually give you like, a minute and a half, 2 minutes to pick a couple of these that that if you got off of it, and I'll explain what that means after you select which ones, that it could open the door to your house so that you can have these different conversations, these meaningful conversations. So if you would just do that, I'm just going to be silent for a couple minutes. Not long, because we're running short on time, and just what sticks out to you. So go ahead and if you write that down or really clear it up in your mind. This could be friends, could be extended family members, could be a spouse, a child, a boss, a colleague. Could be resentment because you were passed over for something that you thought was legitimately yours. Could be the damn the COVID thing, that's taken away so much of our openings to express ourselves and do what we love doing. Could be a very ancient offense that has stuck with you or hurt, that has caused you now to be distrusting, to open yourself up in the same manner with someone new. All right. I just want the ones that jumped out at you. So go ahead and close that screen first. Oh, no, leave it up. Leave it up, Taylor. Thank you. So I'd just like a couple of you to just share, if you would, if you're willing. What sticks out to you? Go ahead.
Oh, this is Alexandra. Can you see me?
Yes, I can.
Awesome. I was thinking what stuck out to me was actually being nice, like being a good like being attached to being a good person. And that prevents me sometimes from just being whatever's needed in the moment. Like, I was just thinking of like the first day of Impact, and like somebody breaks a rule, and it's like how uncomfortable that was. Like for you to just be whatever was needed. So for me, it's about like letting go of being nice, because it may not be what's needed. Like,
yeah, very good. And tied to that is what people will think of you, right? So, by the way, I didn't ask anybody to do this. So when you share, like you shared your name also, are you still in Florida, Alexandra?
I'm in Florida. We have great schools here. When I was telling my story. Yep.
Okay. All right. So if you'd share where you're at also, that'd be great. Thank you very much. Nadine, I think you wanted to share. Go ahead.
Yeah. There's two that stood out to me. One was the need to be right, in control. And the other one is having people get me. I have long been on a journey of, like many of us, of knowing thyself. And as a tribute to my folks, I feel pretty well parented in some areas of like personal regard and having a voice and those things. And one of the things that is pronounced as I communicate with other women, for example, is the idea that their father wasn't there for them or whatever, those kinds of things. And so I had one that was there for me. And so he's gone, and so is my mom. And so I feel the devastation pretty pronounced. And they got me, and nobody else will ever, and yet right now I feel gotten, and that's okay. I don't have to be gotten always. There are moments that I am gotten, and the Holy Spirit power comes and reminds me, and it's okay when I'm not gotten, and it's wonderful when I am. It's more treasured when that comes. But to release that in every situation, every person, everywhere I am, needs to be profoundly getting me, because it's okay. I'm realizing that I have held people in contempt.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much, Nadine. I have time for one or two more, because we're going to do some other stuff here on the tail end of this. So one or two more that would share?
I can go. What came to mind for me was getting off this false idea of the fact that I don't have value and I don't have anything to contribute. And so that relates to me getting off my history and going into the future, and letting go of my assumptions of myself and what other people think of me, and comparisons with others that somehow stop me from moving forward.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. That's so powerful. That's one of the main reasons I love doing the work that I do, to see people experience the freedom of contributing the gift that they uniquely are. And so I like that very much. Thank you. Nadine, I like what you shared as well. Alexandra, let's have one more very quick, just be concise.
This is Maggie from Boston. I have getting off people liking me, hearing me, comparisons and expectation.
Yeah. So there's a lot of nuances on these, so I'd like you to just really think about these things, because they really can get in the way, and these are so subtle, some of them, and ultimately it keeps you from actually just opening that door. And so I don't know if we really want to shift to like when you were sharing, Nadine, if everybody was out to get you in a different way, right?
Right.
And you're from Grand Rapids, and anyway, so now getting off it, why it's so powerful, it's something that you can you're fully in control of. And it doesn't even require necessarily that you share it with who you've been on it with. You could just let it go, right? You don't. Now, when I did this, I remember when I did this exercise, I actually interacted with one of my brothers, and I did share it with him, because like I say, I learned these things that I learned from the mistakes and the rough experiences I've had, because even though I never said out loud the things that I shared with him that I was getting off of, believe me, he knew them, he heard them, and it got in our way. So, you don't necessarily have to share it with the person, although it could be a powerful opening if you do. And so, and when you don't have all these things in your way, then you can truly begin towards offering a vision of what you want to have, and having a meaningful conversation towards that. But if these kind of things and unforgiveness are in the way, that's one of the most powerful things I learned about unforgiveness. You've truly forgiven someone when you're willing to open yourself up in the same vulnerable way with a new person as you had with the person who hurt you. And so again, having a vision that's compelling enough to call you through your resistance and your insistence that things look the way that you prefer, and becoming creative, it releases so much creative energy when you don't have to put all this force into trying to get people to be the way that you want them to be. All right, so Taylor, I'd like you to unmute, and what I'd like to offer now is, if anybody has a question about anything that we've shared, if you want to ask myself or Taylor a question, let's just have a few minutes to do that, and we just wanted to open this up, and then we'll close it up. Or share a thought about it, whatever you want.
This is Kim. I have a quick question on how to apply this in the context of also setting healthy boundaries with people.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm not an expert in that. I probably don't have enough boundaries sometimes, but I think it depends on the person, right? I think there's different levels you go to depending on how important that person is in your life in an ongoing way. And but this is why I thought it was important to share. You may not even have to tell them you're on it. You've been on it with them. You just get off of it, and then you remember how when Taylor was sharing, she talked about someone was sharing. They talked about just the presence they had with you. It'll change the presence you have with them when you get off of it. So you may not have to talk about it and violate any boundaries, but you realize that you're resilient, you're powerful, and people are going to disappoint you, and you don't have to get stuck about it.
Kim, do you know Brene Brown?
Yes.
Who doesn't?
Duh.
an awesome, if you just go on YouTube, you can Google vulnerability and self-disclosure. She articulates this so well that vulnerability is not the same as self-disclosure. Being risky, exposing yourself, those are things that don't necessarily, they're mutually exclusive, I guess you could say, versus like sharing content or self-disclosing intimate details about yourself. So you can actually be vulnerable without self-disclosing a lot of intimate details.
Right.
And she kind of talks through that. So I would definitely recommend her as a resource for more information on that.
I think I've seen the talk that you're referring to, actually, but thank you.
Good advice. Thank you. Someone else? Questions, thoughts?
You had made a statement that I control the getting off, and I think, how would you apply that to the list that you provided? I think some may be a little bit easier than others, but any additional insight on that? I mean, because I think it's going to be more than I will not do X. But I'm just curious.
Well, and Gary, by the way, where do you live? I forgot.
Oh, sorry, Richmond, Virginia.
Virginia, okay. So I think, and Taylor, you could jump in on this too. I think that it's not about that. Why I say your control is because it's what you're holding on to that it's getting in the way. And you could just decide to release that. And are some things easier than others? I don't know. Like when Alexandra shared, she was about getting off being nice. At first glance, that may seem easy for some people, but believe me, when your whole persona is tied up in that is not an easy thing to let go of. Mm-hmm. It's a winning strategy. And so it's not about what's harder or what's easier. It's just what's in your way. And since you're the one that's stuck on it, you can decide to release it. You don't have to, this is about owning your own stuff that's in the way, right? It's not about getting other people to agree with you that you should be stuck on something. No, you see, hey, this is getting in my way to being present with a person the way that could open up meaningfulness and connection at a new level. And of course, some things are just reserved for your special, intimate partner, person in your life. But you could do this and it'll open up things for just about anybody you meet.
Yeah, I might also add to what you were saying. I think part of getting off of it is like knowing what is there to get off of. Because I think, like, going back to my conversation, I didn't even know what was occurring to me that was keeping me so stuck. And I actually had to go back and consider what was actually going on in this conversation that was getting in my way. And so I think if you can just begin by having an openness and a curiosity to discover those things, then you can begin to figure out what to do with them.
Can I say something really quick?
Sure.
What I loved about the gals, I don't have all the view, but somebody was talking about the boundary and thoughts on that, and you said you're not an expert in that. But what's so interesting about a boundary, or let's say forgiveness of the offender, I have a story, probably like many of you, and that story relates to what seemed like a really, really assaulting, completely wrong and inappropriate, that did not have anything to do with me, offense. And that event is scarring and deep and all that. And so doing the work, and I feel in my gut and my soul, depending upon the day, that the forgiveness has happened. But to go again with and offer the forgiveness, and I feel like that's an ongoing thing, but in many ways done for that person and that situation's capacity. So then what the distinction you made that I loved is that doing the work of that so that you are then free to give, surrender, open up to another person. So you may have to draw the boundary on that other offense or that person for a year or whatever it takes, but you're not going to open up in the same way to that, but you're freed up to offer it to the next situation.
Yeah.
And that to me,
Well, that's an important distinction.
That's a boundary.
Because becoming vulnerable to a person who's hurt you over and over could just be stupid, right? But the point I was making that you picked up on is that if you don't offer full forgiveness, even with a new person, you just won't become that vulnerable again. And that's when
you'll blame a new person who has a clean slate, who did nothing to you because of something you're holding from a past event person. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. All right. So we're going to shift. We only have 4 minutes left. And so as many as can go with a sentence or something, just go around and something that you're taking away from this conversation tonight. We have 4 minutes. So just go. Whoever would like to unmute. What are you taking away from this? What's been resourceful for you?
Hey, this is Tracy from Arizona, and I really liked what you said, and it's definitely something that has made a marked difference with me, having gone through both Reinvent and Impact, and that is, I feel like there were relationships that I kept trying to go to and trying to resolve, and thinking, you know, why isn't this working, and why won't this person listen to me, and why can't we do this, until I finally understood that it was a me problem, that I had such a desire to have this person like or love me the way I felt like I needed to be liked or loved, that I was causing a lot of the issue. And it wasn't about, why can't I have a good relationship with this person? It was really about me going, what is it about me that what is the obstacle that I'm creating that's causing some of the issue that I'm having with this person? So that was probably the biggest takeaway, and that was a great reminder when you just said that a minute ago, Enyo. I really appreciated that reminder.
Tracy, that's very powerful. All right, 2 minutes left, so just a quick, more concise takeaway, although I love what you shared, Tracy. I'm mindful of the time. So a few more people, just one takeaway from tonight.
This is Alexandra from Florida. My takeaway is it may be stupid to keep going back to certain people. And then what Nadine said about it could be with other people. And so it just opens up abundance.
Awesome. Thank you. Someone else?
This is Reagan from Houston. And
Hi, Reagan.
I learned that my need to be heard has hindered a lot of conversations.
Awesome. That's a good one too. All right, 1 more minute. So someone else?
To get off being right for me. I
What's
think
that?
I shut down conversations, so.
What's that, Marilyn?
Sometimes I think because I need to be right, I shut down other conversations.
And
I'm from Jackson, Michigan.
Yep, powerful.
Hi, this is John from Fredericksburg, Virginia. And what I learned is to just go for it and not to prejudge how the other person is going to respond, but just, be willing to be vulnerable that way.
Powerful. Thank you very much, John. All right, so we have probably less than a minute left. I'm going to wrap this up. And Taylor, you could say what you want, but I just want to extend my heartfelt thanks again for you guys taking an hour out of your life and being with us. And so great to see people from all over the country and internationally on here. And this is work that you can continue to do. And really, when you have a compelling vision, it calls you, it pulls you. Doesn't force you. You don't have to force it. It's just something that pulls at you. And so I just want to encourage you to doing that. Taylor, and by the way, Taylor is one of our apprentices, and I'm so glad you're on board, Taylor.
Arizona homeowners, if you have a power meter like this on the side of your house, you can qualify to erase your energy bill.
Thank you. I added a quote to the chat. It's from Brene Brown. I already quoted her. It says, "When you feel at risk, exposed, don't tap out. Stay brave, stay uncomfortable, stay cringy in the moment, lean into the hard conversation, keep leading, and stay brave." So that's my my blessing for you as you go into your week.
All right. Well, thank you on behalf of Reinvent Ministries and all you wonderful grads. Thank you very much for joining us. And I look forward to being with you again. And that's it. Chris, you want to say anything in closing?
Oh, we'll see you all next week. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.